I wouldn't say it's my favourite Henry, but it's my favourite Henry to play, definitely, because everyone wants to play a villain, right? And you go, when he's kind of exploring those darker sides of himself, those are definitely the most rewarding for me. And that would be my choice. But it's not up to me. The player gets to choose which version they want to play.
In less than 2 weeks of hitting both consoles and PC, Kingdom Come Deliverance II sold just over 2 million copies with no signs of losing momentum. Needless to say, Warhorse Studios created quite the medieval experience. And to dive deeper into what makes this franchise so special, we have the man himself, Henry of Skalitz, Tom McKay. You look just like you look in the game. I got to ask you this, Tom. How does it feel actually returning to the series as Henry?
It feels really good. I mean, I think the first game was obviously much smaller in scale and scope. And the second game was to some extent the game that Warhorse wanted to make in the first place, but didn't necessarily have the resources to make. And so what they've done this time around is just make everything bigger and bolder and more kind of technicolor, including Henry. And when they first laid out to me their plans for the character and the kind of element of choice that the player would have in the second game, more so than the first game, I just felt hugely excited. So on the one hand, it's incredibly thrilling because of everything that you can do in the second game. But on the other hand, it's just a total joy to return to this character who I love and who is essentially the same character. I mean, the core of who he is exactly the same, but the world in which he lives and the choices that he can make have just ballooned, and that's a hugely exciting thing.
The first game was released back in 2018, and 7 years later, we have the sequel. So describe like the process of, I guess, like first you finding the voice for your portrayal of Henry for the first game, and then returning to him several years later, like I guess rediscovering the character.
In the first case, it was like approaching any new character where everything's up for grabs. You can kind of make him whoever you want him to be, and obviously he can sound however you want him to sound. That process in the first game involved me going to Prague for a day when I wasn't cast. It was kind of an audition of sorts. And we did this day that was essentially like a workshop day where we were on the performance capture stage, just playing around. So Dan, who's the lead creative, brilliantly creative, and some of the key members of the team were there. And we basically just played around with some physicality. Particularly, we played around with accents and different ways that Henry might sound. And it was kind of like sculpting. We just sort of carved this character out together and settled on this version of particularly how we thought he would sound, which is this kind of... probably British audiences can hear it, but perhaps not others. It's a very gentle, like West Country accent. So it's not massively different from how I speak, but it is different. I'm from the Midlands. The sound is more of kind of like a West Country. So I guess a couple hundred miles from where I grew up. And then that stayed. That's what we chose. There was probably then, we worked on that game for several years. There was a kind of gap in the middle where there was a developmental gap where they were kind of between games and then obviously developing the second game, but without the involvement of actors. Then there was the pandemic, which slowed us down. So there was probably maybe 3 or 4 years between, for me, not playing Henry, for me never saying his voice out loud. But then coming back to it, it was a really pleasant surprise how quickly and easily he just kind of bubbled up inside me, because the length of time which I've spent playing this character, even on the first game, is longer than anything I've done before. And I've kind of spent more time in his skin than any other character that I've played before. So it kind of just arrived again in me, to my joy and surprise, because I was worried that it might not, And that's been the case ever since, really, all the way through, even though I was taking breaks and doing other, a lot of my work is in TV, and I was going off to do other TV bits between performance capture periods and voiceover periods. But I would come back to Prague and it would just be there. He'd just kind of bubble up in my system and there he would be. And I was very pleased that was the case.
You must be like a bit of a medieval expert at this point, right? Like, because I assume like a lot of research went into that aspect of it as well. So like, you got the voice down, but like one of the things that like Warhorse kind of does, they put like a lot of emphasis on like historical authenticity. So what type of research went into that for you?
Well, for me, my job was made much easier by the fact that they, as you say, put a huge emphasis on historical accuracy. So they have in-house historians. A huge amount of that work is done before I arrive. So I can't claim to be an expert in medieval history, but I can claim to be an expert in any of the elements of that history that impact Henry. And luckily for me, anything that was vaguely relevant to my story or my choices or my physicality or my voice, there was somebody there to help me with that and answer those questions. So they essentially had done all the legwork. And I had the benefit and the privilege of just being like, what about this? What would happen in this situation? And they always had an answer. Their attention to detail on every level, including historical accuracy, is mind blowing. They're an amazing studio, and they're kind of driven by passion, and that bleeds into every corner of the game, including that. So they take great pride in that, and they're right to, because this game is very much rooted in Bohemian, Czech history. It's a game made by a Czech developer in Prague. So there's this real sense of pride and passion and duty and responsibility from them to get this right, and I think they have, but I cannot take credit for that.
I want to kind of talk about like the performance capture aspect of things, because I'm assuming like the way it was done for the first game is it like, would you call it vastly different from the way it was done in the second game? Like, were you wearing like a mocap suit? Like, were you like actually wielding some of the weapons? Like, what was that process like?
It wasn't vastly different, but the biggest element that was different was the HMCs, the head-mounted cameras. The stage itself was almost identical. The weaponry and all of those funny props, all those things are really basic because they don't need to be anything more than basic. You're kind of, it's very like the theatre work that I do, where it's all in your imagination. So you don't need some elaborate sword, or you just have foam swords essentially. So it's quite funny when you see it all in the flesh. But that's all you need. All you need is something physical to hold and your imagination, and the rest is my job and everybody's job around me to kind of make it real. But in terms of from 1 to 2, the biggest difference was the cameras, and I think on a sort of logistical and physical level, they're quite different because they're quite big and they're quite heavy, and they fill the space in front of your face because the camera is looking back at you and capturing your facial performance. So just physically, you're kind of navigating that with other actors, and whether it's in a scene of intimacy or a fight or whatever, obviously that's something to get around. But more importantly and more helpfully, it means that your performance can be much more, not more subtle and more nuanced, because we were always going for that in the first one, but a bit like a close-up on TV. You're able to kind of relay things in your performance with much more detail because the camera's right there. And that was a huge benefit to using the HMCs in the second game. But apart from that, it wasn't the kind of physical experience of it, and the motion capture suits were pretty much the same. The kind of dots and all the things that everybody knows about. That was all the same. And it's, Warhorse have a great setup, but it's not a particularly elaborate one, because it doesn't need to be, really, because the brilliance comes from the mind of Dan and all the devs. That is what makes Warhorse a brilliant studio. It's not the equipment.
Did you ever imagine that this franchise would cultivate such a massive fan base? Like, when you auditioned for it, were you thinking, like, did you go in thinking this would, like, you would be where you are today, as far as like, because it's huge. Like, I'm pretty sure you get recognized on the street every day by gamers, I'm assuming, because you are the face. You're Henry.
Yeah. So to answer your question, no, I never imagined. It's, to pick up on your last point, it's a huge privilege to be the kind of face of the game. And yes, people stop me, and it's always lovely and supportive and funny. Like our fan base is really, really funny. So it's always warm and positive. The whole journey has been this like huge, beautiful education for me in so many ways. And when I auditioned, I knew it was a game. I knew it was shooting in Prague. I knew the dates. I kind of, knew the sort of logistical parameters. I knew that it was funded by a Kickstarter campaign, which is something that we're all incredibly proud of, because actually that fan base, which has supported us all the way along and grown and been like this huge energy ball that's kept us moving, started with those people who made the whole thing happen in the first place. So I knew that. So I did know that there was this kind of passion and this kind of personal element to the game for the studio and the people making it and the fans, the small fan base that was supporting it then. And I knew that they wanted it to become this big animal, but obviously no one could guarantee that. So really, we just went into it throwing everything at it. I really did feel that passion, even from that one day of that final audition. I could really sense that. I went for lunch with Dan and a couple of other people, and they were beautifully honest and personable and available about what it was and what they were trying to do. So I had a sense that I was probably working with some incredibly talented and certainly passionate people, for sure. But in terms of the quality of the game and what it would do and how people would respond to it on a wider stage, there's no way, if you told me that I would be sat here chatting to you now and the kind of conversations that are happening online about it, and there's no way I would have thought that. And I don't know that anybody at the studio would have thought it, except for maybe Dan, because he does have this incredible belief, this kind of confidence which is born out of talent. So I think he probably believed it was possible, and probably the core team around him. But no, I had no idea. I kind of thought I was going to be in Prague for, I think it was like 6 weeks at that time, with a bit of voiceover added on, and that would probably be the end of it. But here we are all these years later.
How would you describe the difference between, like, I guess, like, traditional media and video game, like working in acting in both of these different fields? Like, because you've been in television and movies as well. So what's the difference, you would say?
I had a pretty good understanding of the gaming world. People often say you're not a gamer, but I did play games, but not kind of big open world RPGs. But I had a good understanding of how the gaming world works and what was possible. But in terms of from a hands-on perspective, I didn't have that experience, and that has just blown my mind. And I think it's an incredible world. And the other thing that my eyes have been open to is the fan bases, so the communities that build up around these games, which are so much more interactive and impassioned and lively, I suppose, than the fan bases that surround theatre and TV and other more traditional media. And that has been, luckily for us, an amazing thing, because our game has this hugely positive, funny, intelligent, impassioned fan base. We get the benefit of that being thrown at us and sort of being taken along for that ride with them. Now, I know that's not always the case with every game, but I think for the majority of games, I think there is that kind of sweep of energy that goes with you, unlike TV. And that's just been a beautiful thing to be a part of. And I sort of feel really privileged to be kind of propelled forward by that. For
those that aren't aware, depending on, what choices players make, Henry could be like a real hero or he could be a real jerk. So I want to know what's the most fun version of Henry to play?
So for me, and this is just my opinion, I love those darker corners. I love that when they laid out to me the range of possibilities, I assumed that I'd be coming back and it'd be like, okay, so Henry stays in the middle, he's the anchor, and everything else is what it is around him. I didn't expect to be able to make those dark choices, but they're all born out of really brilliant storytelling, as with everything that comes out of Warhorse. The scripts are brilliant, the story is brilliant, and so it all comes essentially from the loss of his parents and this kind of like dark energy that pushes him forwards. And so it's really legitimate. It's not just a kind of trick to be like, oh, that'd be fun. It's all of it is born out of something that is credible. And so for me, when he goes into those really dark, murky corners and becomes something much more questionable, I wouldn't say it's my favorite Henry, but it's my favorite Henry to play, definitely, because everyone wants to play a villain, right? And you go, when he's kind of exploring those darker sides of himself, those are definitely the most rewarding for me. And that would be my choice. But it's not up to me. The player gets to choose which version they want to play.
What do you think are some of the most standout qualities of Henry that kind of makes him like endearing? Like, because you mentioned moving, like you can move towards a darker path, but there's still something there that's endearing about Henry and his character. Like, what do you think those qualities are?
Part of what Dan got so right is that with your playable character, I guess there has to be something of the everyman about him, so that he kind of fills as broad a canvas as he can and appeals to as many people as possible, but without just being some like blank canvas that then is not, is without charisma or is entirely uninteresting. And I think they've struck a brilliant balance of making him a kind of broad palette that you can paint, a kind of canvas that you can paint on yourself, but who has like fundamental qualities that are just there, because he has to be, otherwise there's nothing to him. And I would say because his journey from KCD to KCD2 is very much a kind of boy to man story. So fundamentally, he is this kind of like puppy dog, silly, playful, this guy who likes to throw things that he shouldn't be throwing at people's houses and like do silly stuff like that, which is, and he likes to go and get drunk and have fun with his friends and all that. So he's kind of like this puppy dog kid, this silly kid that wants to have fun with his friends, who's kind of then inside this shell of this warrior who's lost his parents, who's seeking vengeance. And that's the kind of boy to man thing. And he's both of those things all at once, even all the way through the second game. That kind of kid in him never disappears. And so I think those are the like key things that make him funny, that make him appealing, that hopefully make him charismatic, and and people want to engage with and have fun. But they also know that when things get serious, they get really serious. And he has the ability to kind of be incredibly, he has a kind of rage inside him that's pretty overwhelming and that bubbles up in different ways depending on how you choose to let that happen. And so he kind of swings between these quite extreme elements. And that's sort of the key of who he is. The key to who he is really a kind of a grieving child who just wants to be a kid having a fun time and perhaps marrying the person of his choice and staying in a small village. But he's dragged out of that by this kind of big political war that's taking place in his country that has nothing to do with him until it does. And so that's kind of the heart of who he is.
And I honestly, I gotta say, I think, Warhorse, they were definitely cooking. This could be, I think it is definitely a Game of the Year contender. And I don't know, hopefully we'll see you in LA for the Game Awards, I mean, knock on wood. Cause I mean, like you're everyone's performance, not just yours, but like you said, it takes an entire team. Like everyone, did just exceptional work on this game. And keeping my fingers crossed for this one, because you all deserve it.
It's so flattering for us to be mentioned in that way. And, we'd be lying if we didn't say we'd all want to be there. Of course, we would love to be considered in that conversation. Obviously, it's not why you make the game. It's the reason you make the game is for the players and for the players to have that experience. If it were to be recognized in that way, obviously that would be amazing. We would all absolutely love that. But those decisions are not ours to make. So all we can do is just keep, I'm now working on the DLCs and just keep doing the absolute best job that we can do, which I can say with total honesty and with pride, actually. That was one thing I was really strict about, because Warhorse is strict about it, was being really detailed and sort of taking the time to make it the best it could be. And definitely, I was doing 8-hour voiceover sessions, they were like double voiceover sessions because of shooting it in Prague and needing to be back in the UK for other work. So we did these very, very long sessions, but I was really strict with myself and made them be strict with me, that I was always, if I needed another take, we'd do another take. And I'd always drill into each choice, because the versions of the character are so different. I was like, I'm not letting that slip. I'm not going to, not for a second am I going to let something get through that I don't think is 110%. And they really afforded me the kind of time and space to do that. And so for that, I do feel really, really proud.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you so much for your time. But before we wrap up, you touched upon this earlier, like your experience with the fans of the game. Do you have any message you'd like to kind of deliver to the fans, perhaps as Henry?
Well, if I was as Henry, then there's only one thing I would say, which is that I'm feeling quite hungry. But in all seriousness, really, the main message is just to say thank you so much for the kind of support and energy that we've had right from the beginning of this journey years and years ago. And, the kind of predominantly Czech-based fans that started us out, but then all these communities joining us from all over the world throughout our journey, and especially in the last few months. It's been completely overwhelming, and we absolutely hear it. We see it. We know you're there. We know that we wouldn't be here without that fan base. We just wouldn't. And everyone at Warhorse knows that. So I think the financial support that everyone gave on the Kickstarter campaign, but more importantly, the kind of energetic support, all of that love and positivity and enthusiasm, which kept us going throughout, and this kind of core fan base that took us between the two games when a lot of people were giving up hope and thought there wouldn't be a second game. And that carried us on and kind of got us to this place where, we're kind of realizing the dreams that Warhorse had and executing that for the fans themselves. And it seems to me that, people are happy with what we've done. And that, honestly, there's no greater award than that. So just to say thank you really for all that love and positivity, and it's kind of being bounced right back at you from all of us.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you once again for just, sharing your experience with me and everyone that's watching. It's been an amazing pleasure talking to you.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much, Akeem. Your work's amazing, and it's a pleasure to be part of that. So thank you for having me.
Aw, damn, Tom. Thank you, man. Dude, that means a lot. It means a lot. Thanks for saying that, dude. And that was Tom McKay, the voice of Henry from Kingdom Come Deliverance II. Now, for more on KCD2, keep it locked right here on IGN.